everyone. This is your cruise director, Kristen, and today we're going to witness the end of an era at Chapel Hill Mall in Akron, Ohio. April 18th, 2021 was intended to be the mall's last official day open, but I'm still receiving mixed reports that the Party City store, which does not have an exterior entrance, is remaining open a little longer. Everyone else is on their way out, and as you can see, this is as dead as a dead mall gets. It still has people walking around inside. This mall has been on my list for quite some time, so obviously when I heard rumblings of it closing, I made a point to get there before I missed my opportunity to do so. The vibe in here was nostalgic, to say the least. A lot of people walking around taking photos before they lost their chance. Ground was broken on Chapel Hill Mall in 1965 on the former Buckholzer family farm. It was built via a partnership between Richard R.B. Buckholzer and Forest City Enterprises, who would later go on to build Rolling Acres Mall, also in Akron. The name was an homage to an old Indian council circle that had been discovered on the land in the 30s when it belonged to the developer's father, a local farmer and department store owner. Early announcement about the mall's construction touted it as being the first enclosed shopping mall in the Akron area. However, by the time it was finished, it had been beaten to the market by about a year by Summit Mall. One thing I wasn't able to nail down is the exact date of the mall's opening. I think it's because it didn't really have one. Stores opened inside as the mall was completed. Sears opened in October 1966, and the earliest inline tenants seem to have opened a month later in November. You can find advertisements for the mall from early 1967 that show about half the space is filled. However, JCPenney and O'Neill's didn't open until a few months later. All in all, when it opened, Chapel Hill Mall was home to 3 anchors: O'Neill's, JCPenney, and Sears. All 3 featured some sort of eatery, and both JCPenney and Sears had auto centers in their parking lot. The former Sears Auto Center sits derelict and abandoned, but the JCPenney one has since been turned into a Firestone tire store. In addition to the 3 department stores, there were both Kroger and A&P supermarkets, a Woolworth also with a restaurant, and a Grey Drug. While we're here, let's talk about how your cruise director missed the fountain still being on. I drove straight here, a 4-hour drive with only one stop. I don't know about you, but when I've been driving that long, my first destination is the facilities. When I walked past the fountain, it was still on, and a lady I presume worked for the mall was proudly taking a selfie with it. I was on my own mission, and I was waiting my turn until after she was done. By the time I got back 5 minutes later, I realized the selfie I witnessed was commemorating the fountain being turned off on what was intended to be their last day open. You win some, you lose some. Fountain Lady, if your photo is on Instagram or something, tag me at UniComm Productions. I'd love to see it. When researching old newspapers to put this timeline together, I found an article announcing the new general manager for the Sears location, who was being transferred from the downtown Akron store. The curious part of the article, for me, was that in addition to listing his credentials and the number of years of service with the company, it included his wife's personal information, including her maiden name and hometown, along with his 2 teenage daughters' names and ages, and his home address. To the modern eye, this is absolutely bonkers. What we called advertising back in the 60s, we would call doxing now. Want ads from the 60s are similarly wild. It was much more acceptable back then to specify that you were looking for responsible married men or attractive single ladies. The 70s and 80s seem to have been fairly uneventful for Chapel Hill Mall. During this period, the mall boom happened, resulting in the partnership of Forest City Enterprises and R.B. Buckholzer building another grander mall, only 17 minutes away. If you're even a casual enthusiast of dead mall lore, you know its name well. Rolling Acres Mall, the infamous failure that launched 1,000 Instagram posts. To this day, if you see an article about an empty mall, it's usually accompanied by a photo of the interior of Rolling Acres, even though hundreds of others have closed since it did in 2008. The Akron-Cleveland area was, to say the least, overmauled. We wouldn't start seeing the consequences of that oversaturation until the early 2000s, though. Rolling Acres was nearly 50% larger, featured 5 anchor stores, including repeats of the 3 at Chapel Hill and a food court. It was in the late 80s that the 2 malls' owners began considering an expansion at Chapel Hill by attempting to court Higbee's to open there. This was not to be, as Higbee's was owned in part at the time by the Edward J. DeBartolo Company, who were more inclined to open new locations in their own malls in the area. The Akron Beacon-Journal even reported on the intended expansion in January 1990. By 1992, Higbee's had been sold completely to Dillard's, who converted all Higbee's stores to their nameplate. However, Chapel Hill did receive an expansion in 1994 that added a 12-bay food court that included the carousel we saw earlier. New light fixtures and new ceilings were added throughout the mall, along with an updated water feature at Center Court. Possibly because compared with some of its neighbors, Chapel Hill was doing fairly well at the time, news stories about the mall are rare during the 90s and 2000s. No news is good news, I suppose. It was business as usual. While there have been some interior facelifts over the years, the overall structure is more or less the same as it always has been since the 60s, and malls back then were much darker and didn't generally have as many, if they had any, skylights. Dimmer lighting was the norm at the time, making the space feel more intimate and smaller than it was. Fast forward to the current day when we associate more light with cleanliness, safety, and modernity, and this mall feels cavernous, especially with so many of the lights off. Chapel Hill was purchased by CBL in 2004 from the Buckholzer Forest City Partnership. CBL's first action as the new owners was to undergo a second mall-wide remodel that freshened up the interior. It was rededicated on November 4, 2006. CBL would manage to hold on to Chapel Hill until 2014, when the property fell into foreclosure and subsequent receivership. At the time of the mall being placed on the market in October 2015, it was reported that they had 15 vacancies consisting of 11% of the mall's leasable space. The mall was purchased by Kohan Real Estate Investments in 2016. Now, if you've been following us for a while, you know that some mall owners are better at what they do than others. Kohan, if I can be so blunt, is bottom tier along with Moonbeam and Namdar. They don't have a great reputation for actually being able to turn properties around despite their stated intentions. At least, they don't seem to have a great ability to turn them around and still keep them operating as shopping malls. The first of the three anchors to fall was Macy's in 2016. Over the years, the space held a total of 4 department store nameplates, beginning with O'Neill's in 1967, followed by May Company, Kaufmann's, and finally Macy's, through the series of mergers we're all too familiar with. Sensing the downhill slide that had begun, Aeropostale, Old Navy, and Express would exit the mall the same year. Shortly after, in March 2017, Sears closed as well, leaving the anchors on both ends of the mall vacant. The next few years would be a slow decline, with national chains moving out either due to poor performance of that location specifically, or due to closing entirely in the case of places like Payless Shoes. The mall was not being cared for. In January 2020, it was reported that the mall's electricity was in danger of being shut off due to non-payment, along with the power at another mall owned by Kohan, Richmond Town Square. A payment for the past due amount of nearly $200,000 was remitted at the 0 hour to keep the lights on, but this was just the tip of the iceberg for the mall's financial woes. They were also being sued by Summit County for past due property taxes in the amount of $753,733. The city made multiple efforts to assist the owners in redeveloping or revitalizing the property, going so far as to send members of the Akron Economic Development Task Force into the mall to introduce themselves to storekeepers, handing out business cards and offering to help with things like relocation or financial assistance. Kohan lost ownership of the mall shortly thereafter. The final anchor, JCPenney, closed in July 2020, and the mall's fate was all but sealed. In March 2021, Chapel Hill Mall was purchased by a company called Industrial Commercial Properties, who announced plans to convert it into a sort of business park. It has been announced that a cabinet-making company will be moving into the former Sears store, and the former Macy's has been occupied by a mini self-storage company for a year or so. The transformation is coming. An unofficial announcement was made that the mall would close as a retail center on Sunday, April 18th, 2021, which is the day yours truly descended on the property to document it, along with seemingly half of the other people who document malls in the region. My fellow DMOD members and brothers from other mothers, Anthony from Faded Commerce and Sal from the Expedition Log, came down too. By the way, if you're not a member of the greatest Discord server in the universe, you should be. The link is in the description, it's free, and you can use it on the internet machine of your choice. I've been to a few malls on their final days. This one seemed sadder than some of the others. People were frantically moving things out of their store spaces, a few boldly choosing to remain open until the bitter end, and you got the impression that no one was really given much notice to get out. I thought back to Knoxville Center Mall on its last day, when the tenants had been given a few months' notice, and the mood there was decidedly different, resigned and accepting of its fate. However, Chapel Hill Mall felt like it was being hurriedly evacuated. It remains to be seen when the doors will be shut for good, however. Party City appears to be remaining open, and it does not have an exterior mall entrance. I hypothesize that should they stay open more than a few more weeks, some sort of barrier preventing access to the remainder of the mall will be installed. The good news is there is an immediate plan for what to do with the property, and the mall's new owners seem motivated to get on with it, which means, at the very least, we're not staring down the barrel of another Rolling Acres or Century 3. Chapel Hill, not only a retail establishment, but a repository of over 50 years of memories for generations of Akronites, will not remain standing as a rotten corpse of a building for years. If there's a silver lining here, that's it. Maybe we're starting to learn something about what to do when an era ends. You start a new one. Thank you for watching. Please drop us a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. A very special thank you to Phil, Eva, Dean, Reese, and the rest of our patrons for helping make short notice trips like this one possible. If you'd like to become a patron, please see the link in the description. As always, I'm your cruise director, Kristen, and this is UniComm Productions. I'll catch up with you from the road next time.